Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be wrapping up all the books I read in January. I got into a pretty bad reading slump at the very end of December, and that kind of carried on throughout the entirety of January. Unfortunately, none of these books in this video are over 3 stars. So the first book I completed in January, which makes it also the first book I completed in 2021, was Battle Royale, and I think this was my favorite read of the month. So this is an older book. It was published in the 1990s and it is translated from Japanese. We follow a class of school students who at first believe that they're about to go on a field trip. They don't end up going on a field trip. They end up being part of this program that the government has about once a year, where these kids are taken to an island or some other place that's set up for the program, and they are instructed to kill one another until there is only one student remaining. If they do not comply with the rules of the program, then the collars that they get put around their necks will blow off their heads. So it's very Hunger Game-esque. A lot of this, and the story and the pacing was fantastic. Like, this was such a fast-paced read. Like, this book is pretty thick, but you get through it so quickly because it's so intense. It does lack in character areas. Like, we only really get to see so much of these characters. Even the few we really get to know, we don't get to see much of them outside of the scenario that they're in this book. But I still really liked it. Like, the character I got most invested in ended up dying, and I got quite emotional. I think the other area where this book does fall flat is it is a product of its time. There's quite a lot of sexist, misogynistic language. There's a bit of homophobia that goes on. It's definitely a product that hasn't aged well, so just a heads up if you pick this up. Other than that, I think this was a really fun read. I'm really glad I finally got around to reading it. I really enjoy and take a lot of fun out of reading death survival game stories. I think they're quite addictive. I usually devour those sort of stories really quickly, and I definitely want to try and find more. In the end, this book got 3 stars from me. I also completed The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is like the first book in a huge, epic, long fantasy series that was first written in the 1990s, and I think it only finished a couple of years ago. I'm not entirely sure. This book was exactly what I expected it to be. It's very old school fantasy, and I did really like that because I found the story itself to be quite nostalgic. However, I do think I enjoyed this at the time more than I did because I was reading a lot of books I really didn't like. I read this shortly after reading The Black Prism and The Wise Man's Fear and The Name of the Wind, which is the first book, and I did not like them at all. So I think I might have been a little bit generous towards this book. I'm not entirely sure. I will say I do think the characters kind of lack. Like, I think particularly the main characters that we follow in this are pretty boring. There are some interesting side characters and magic. This book starts off and we're following a group of boys in this small town village. They're farmers and they have to go on the run because they start being chased after these evil minions of like the big baddie. Basically, someone said to me after I completed this book that it is very similar to Lord of the Rings, and I didn't put 2 and 2 together until that person said that to me, and that is so true. This is very similar and reminiscent of Lord of the Rings. It's very clear that Robert Jordan took a lot of inspiration. Apparently the next couple of books as well, I think until book 4, all kind of resemble Lord of the Rings, and then it kind of goes off on its own thing. So if you want to know what this book is about, hopefully that gives you more of an idea. But yeah, I'm still really glad I finally got to this. I definitely plan to continue. I don't know when, like I should say soon, but I don't know. I don't know. And this book was also 3 stars. Okay, I then read Annihilation by VanderMeer. I enjoyed this, but I don't think I read this book particularly at the right time. This is a biopunk novel, and we follow this woman who's going into this area known as Area X, and it's a very secretive area, and there's not much known about it, and there's a lot about it that's kept secret, and a lot about it that the government agency that this woman is working for and has been instructed to go into this area by kept secret, but also they want her to discover and learn more. This is sort of written like a diary. I did enjoy the way this was told. It was told in a way where everything that had happened in this book had already happened. So the girl was retelling her story and you were able to put more pieces together. However, there was more of a focus on the main character than there was Area X. I was much more interested in learning about Area X than I was learning about our protagonist. And so my enjoyment like did dwindle because of that. This is the first book in a trilogy, so I'm guessing that in the next 2 books we will learn a lot more about Area X. And I think if I liked the protagonist more, or if I was more intrigued by her and the other main characters, then I probably would have enjoyed this more. And again, this was a 3-star read. Honestly, my January reading was just...
how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they...
I also completed A Hero Born. This is another translated book. This book is translated from Chinese, and it's the first book in like an epic Chinese fantasy. Plot-wise, this book is quite difficult to describe because in the first 100 pages, we don't even meet the main character. We are introduced to his family, his parents particularly, and their background and sort of struggles that they faced before he came into the world, and the political powers that impact his family's circumstances, and of course the circumstances in which he was born in and how he ends up being raised. We then see him after like page 100 and something born, and we see him grow up, and by the end of this book he is a young man, and this whole sort of book is building up to his influence, political power, and his journey and story. So there's a lot of setup, but I really warmed up to this in the end. Like, I really liked the end, and looking back now, I like how we get this really big scope. Like, we get to see this character's background, and I feel like so often, particularly in Western family, you're introduced to your protagonist or your hero and you don't know their background or their family, and that's sort of part of the discovery. And I like in this that we knew exactly who his family was and where he came from, and then the story wasn't about finding that at all, but about his journey and his destination. There is definitely issues in here with the translation. The naming was very awkward. I went into this knowing that the translation was pretty shite, and I didn't think I was going to really pick up on it, but it was so obvious. That's how bad it was. I would be very surprised if anyone missed it. I really enjoyed the fight scenes in here, and I really loved the setup of things, and I definitely plan to continue. I don't know when, because I believe currently not the entire series is translated, so it's like, do I want to continue? But what if I end up really loving it and I can't continue on because the story is not all translated? So I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think I gave this one 3.5 stars, so rating wise, I think this was the highest. Okay, I also completed The Hobbit. This was exactly what I expected it to be. I haven't read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think I will eventually. I'm not super enthusiastic about it. Something I find with older fantasy, I found this in this book and also in Eye of the World, is there's so much missing in it that modern fantasy does. Modern fantasy has like themes and discussions and just includes so much that I really love and appreciate, and is what ultimately makes me love fantasy. Whereas these books, they don't do that. The women in here and in Eye of the World are pretty much non-existent or all the same. I think there's a very heavy focus, even too much focus on the world and descriptions of the world. Like, often in here we would go to a place, it might be a village, and we would get a description of what the village looked like, and then we'd get a description of like the village's history, and it was like so much building, which is cool in a sense that you really do get a very clear construction of the setting and the history of the place, but then the story and where the story is moving is lost. And that's what happened so often in here, and it really did take away from my enjoyment. All these books are pretty much in vlogs, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts for any of these, I'll have all my vlogs in the description box so you can just like see, because I did talk about this a fair bit in the vlog I read it in. I'm ultimately really glad I read this. Gollum's chapter where he made an appearance was definitely my favorite, and the one bit, I think actually it was one of the best written bits just because we had a lot of story in it and description. Like, we had a really good balance. Most of the time I feel like it's very unbalanced and there's a very heavy focus on the world, and as much as I appreciate and love world building, I think too much is too much. I also gave this book 3 stars in the end. Actually, every book in this video is 3 stars. I'm just looking at the last one, which is The Girl in the Tower, and yes, it was also 3 stars. So January was a month. I read this from Meg with Books Read Along. She was hosting a read along of the Winter Night trilogy. This is book 2. I enjoyed book 1. I gave it 4 stars, and I think where my disappointment really laid with this book was I felt like we had a lot of setup in the first book for magic to kind of develop in further books, and I was really looking forward to seeing the magic in here, particularly because in book 1 we follow the protagonist mostly throughout her childhood, whereas in here she is a teenager. We don't really get much magic in this trilogy at all. This trilogy definitely leans more towards the historical fiction than it does fantasy. It definitely has fantasy elements. In the first book we're introduced to Vaskia and we follow her throughout her childhood. We continue to follow her in here, and it's all about her sort of growing up in a time period where women are expected to become wives at the age of 15 and then to become mothers, and that's how they live their life. They don't have any freedom or independence. Vaskia is a woman not of her times. She as well is someone born with gifts that allow her to see spirits. There are all these amazing cute spirits. There's a lot of household ones and ones in the forest that she can interact with and talk with, and she's deemed a witch and is misunderstood because of her magical abilities, but also being a woman who isn't like other women in her time that are confined and obey to the laws and the expectations that men set. There is a lot in here of not like other girls, Vaskia being the one who's not like other girls. It didn't really bother me too much because of how historically focused this is. I was also pretty disappointed in here with some of the choices of the characters, like particularly some of the villain characters. Throughout the whole series, I didn't really like the direction that they took. There were some really great characters, villainous characters. There was one in here that we were first introduced to in book 1, and he made an appearance at the start of this book, and then he's just absent pretty much the entire book, and it just felt very needless. And then there was like another villain that popped up, and that villain was only in this book. So I didn't really like a lot of those choices. I did really like seeing Vaskia's relationship with 2 of her siblings that we got to see in here. I liked the further exploration of like the spirits and the gods. I would have loved more of the magic. I think that's where it really kind of fell flat for me. Yeah, so I gave this book 3 stars. I have since finished the final book, which I will talk about in my February wrap up. But if you would like to hear more thoughts on this book, we did an entire live show discussion, so I have the live show linked up in the cards and also in the description box, and it is on Meg's channel if you're wondering, because we talked a lot about this book and we all had different opinions, which made it a very interesting discussion. And oh my goodness, that is it. I have not had a wrap up where it's taken me 23 minutes to film this. Usually wrap-ups take me over an hour long, so this is kind of amazing. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to check the description box. I will have all the books linked and then also all the vlogs linked, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts, because I always say more in my vlogs or in live shows, so make sure to check them out to hear more in-depth thoughts. Let me know how your January reading went. I hope it went better than mine. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!